Hi everyone, nice to have you here. How are you doing? Good? I can't hear you. Yeah. Welcome to the first Impact session for Nordic Games. I'm very excited. And I want to introduce our first speaker today, Antonia Koop, the CEO of Kite-Rider, combining neuroscience, education, and games. Go ahead, Antonia. Welcome her.
Thank you. Okay, you made that short indeed. Yeah. Hi there. Well, I see we have lost a few people here. It's thinned out a little bit, but I appreciate that you're all here. I think I have to rethink my titles for my talks in the future. Yeah, so during the opening, we heard a lot about the games industry, about the dynamics of the games industry. But there was one assumption that was sort of always accompanying the morning, and that was that games are for fun and entertainment, and our audience are gamers. In my talk now, I want to expand that assumption a little bit, bust a few myths, and just try to open up a few new ideas and make you think a bit bigger about what games mean now and in the future. I'll try to keep time at the end for Q&A session. Have a fair bit of content to go through, so you will get my brainwash presentation. And then we'll see that you can ask me some questions later. All right? Ready to go? Okay, few words about me before we get really going. As said during the introduction, I'm the CEO of Kite-Rider Strategic Adventures. Kite-Rider is actually a group of companies, that's why you see so many random logos on this slide. And we are focusing on what we describe as games in training and education. That sounds not particularly exciting when you're a games developer, but you will see what it means in the next bits. Just a quick look, that's what I'm planning to go through, be warned. Okay, let's take a big step back and just think some very, very basics about gaming. What are games for? Why do human beings play games? For fun? Of course, and we heard that earlier. But also because it's a means for social interaction. It allows us to engage with each other, to connect. And games are learning. Play is learning. In our human past, there was no separation between game and the serious side of life. Kids learn by playing games. They learn to interact, they learn to discover the world through games. You all know this father, mother, baby gameplay, or Lego bricks. All of that is part of us learning. So there's a natural connection between gaming and learning. And just to get us warmed up a little bit, I want to give you a little game, a puzzle game. Who of you has seen this one already? Quite a few, no? It's fairly known. Okay, the task is very simple. It's a puzzle. Your task is to connect all those 9 dots with 4 straight lines without lifting your imaginary pen. I'll give you a minute to think about that. Just 4. No wonky lines, straight lines, and one has to follow on from the last one. I can't ask you all about the answer now, so I'll just give you the answer. Have you thought of it? Yes? Well done. Why do I show you this? Because this is quite obvious. It's an absolute miniature game. It's a puzzle. But it's a puzzle that gives us a nice example for how we can actually learn by playing games. This is a puzzle that is all about problem analysis and about logic, but it's also the idea of thinking outside the box. If I explain to you here for 1 hour how to think outside the box, you would go out and you have a lot of words in your head, but no visual, no experience of thinking outside the box. This one is an actual experience. I hope you will remember this one. I'll come back to it later again. But just keep in mind, you did a miniature game and you learned something very significant about thinking outside the box. Thinking beyond assumptions. Thinking beyond the assumptions that drive your decisions and your understanding of a situation. So, which leads me to gamification. Using games in education is something that is becoming increasingly popular. This is a typical conversation that I keep having all the time. Someone approaches me and says, what do you do? What does your company do? I say, we develop games for training and education, to keep it short. And they go, oh, I know this. It's gamification. And I go, actually, it's not. It's simulated experiences that enable people to learn through experimentation. And then I usually go, huh, what? And I say, yeah, gamification. It's not. Let's bust a few myths on gamification. What is gamification? Why do people talk about gamification? Well, once upon a time, games, particularly computer games, were the turf of geeks and nerds. The ones who knew how to program in basic programming languages before we had all these nice interfaces. So games were seen as sort of an underground movement. Gamers were an underground movement. They were so a bit strange, very wild. They spoke their own secret languages. But it was the mainstream process, particularly the digital gaming, the computer-based gaming. Board games were more common, no? But then, hooray, we got smartphones. Now, everybody's gaming. Try a commute into London and you see an entire train full of people doing this for the entire commute. So congratulations, if you are a developer of mobile games, well done. You have mainstreamed gaming. That had an interesting side effect, because since games were suddenly becoming more mainstream, suddenly it wasn't anymore in the nerd corner, it wasn't for a particular type of undergroundish people, but everybody was gaming. Everybody got interested in games. For example, the marketing. Some smart marketeer thought, wait a moment, we're trying to keep people engaged with our advertising, with our websites. We're trying to sell them stuff, and they just run off because it's boring. Now these game guys, they managed to keep an entire train full of people engaged on their phones for hours. How do they do that? Oh, well, yeah, that's the secret of gaming, right? That's the expertise of games developers. Games entertain, games engage, and games make people happy. And when you're happy, and your happiness is somewhat loosely associated with a product, you're more likely to buy that product. So the marketeers thought, let's gamify our marketing. When people game it, they're more likely to buy. We can sell stuff. Simultaneously, someone smart thought, wait a moment, our kids sit in school and go after 5 minutes. What can we do to keep them engaged? They go home and they switch on their computers and they go off there for hours. Can we not use that? Can we get our kids more engaged in learning by using games? And, well, there followed an entire industry or production track of educational games for kids. Gamification. We're gamifying education. So, what means gamification now really? It means we're adding gamish elements to a process that is considered boring to make it more interesting. Nothing wrong with that. However, I myself am not a great fan of gamification, and it's not what we're doing, because I believe that the power of games to train goes far beyond any spicing up something that is actually lame. So when you talk about education, food is always a brilliant analogy, so let me throw some food stories at you. I have kids, and I'm horrible in the kitchen. My kids come to me occasionally and they say, you know, we have this school event. Mom, can you make some cupcakes? We need to bring them to school. And I think, what do I do? My cupcakes are always lousy. So what do? I gamify my cupcakes. I take a whole bucket full of icing and make them look cool. And then the kids buy them. They generally don't eat them. They lick off the icing and the rest goes. But anyway, it works. It sells. So I'm doing what the marketeers do. They use something gamish to sell. So that's why this talk is gamification is just icing on a lousy cake. The problem, well, it depends if you see that as a problem, depends on what you want to achieve. If you want to sell, gamification works brilliantly, because gamification is a sales tool. It makes you sell better, it makes your product more interesting, it makes your stuff work better. What it doesn't do is, it doesn't change the substance of what you deliver. So we're still making a lame cake, still not nutritious. Actually, we're making it even less nutritious by adding sugar. But, well, they eat it, or at least they buy it. When we look at that through the educational lens, then that isn't really what we want to do, because there's a reason why kids and why adults find education boring. It's not because it isn't gamish. It is because it is often, or it feels often, incredibly irrelevant. I'm sure all of you have sat in classes in your past thinking, God, why do I have to learn this stuff? I will never ever need that again. That's why we're bored. It's not that we're bored because it isn't delivered with a lot of bling. So the real problem is not the delivery. The real problem is the lousy cake. And gamification doesn't address that. However, games can. So gamification in education works when what we have to learn or to teach as kids or as adults, we're not talking about education necessarily only for kids, if what we need to learn is repetitive, if we need to memorize stuff, if the content is boring, but still needs to be learned. We have that occasionally, you never get really around that entirely. So gamification adds fun. But games can make learning more relevant. Why? Because our games take learning out of the abstract, out of the theoretical, and make it real. It makes it tangible. Think maths. Boring, horrible maths. Okay, you're a programmer, so probably you found maths exciting. A lot of kids hate maths. So why do they hate maths? Because they see a string of numbers, and they say, what is this supposed to be? What does it have to do with my life? What's interesting about it? And it is very rarely explained. You get formulas. Oh, learn this. Okay, yeah, maybe. Learning that is relevant comes easy. When you applied for whatever you did for your games roles, I'm sure you had to learn stuff. And I'm sure some of it was daunting, but a lot of it was interesting because you knew why you did it. You knew what you wanted to achieve. You knew games. You wanted to build games. You wanted to design games. That's relevance. So we know what we learn it for. Now, think about something abstract, physics. You're supposed to learn a bunch of formulas in physics. You go, oh, okay, formulas. They all look the same anyway, to me anyway. But then imagine you could put up your VR headset and find yourself in a dystopian city. Everything's crumbling, nothing works. There's a broken bridge, water spilling out. There's no clean water. People are just slouching around, desperate. And then someone comes and says, you know what, we have to rebuild this bridge because on the other side are the fields with the food. Let's rebuild this bridge. And you can go there, you can look at the bridge, you can experiment, you can say, what materials do we use? What is static? How does it work? What do we need to know to make it work? And then you build your bridge, but you miscalculated, so the bridge crumbles down again. Everything you learn about formulas in physics suddenly makes sense. It has relevance. It has meaning. And then it sticks. You don't even need to memorize it heavily. You will just have it here because you will always see in your mind the bridge. That is the power of games. Games allow us to learn through experience, by experiencing something and not just hearing about it, which goes in and out. By the way, sorry I'm not more experiential. I have a lecture theater to work with. So it's all the boring stuff. I promise, next time I'll try to game it up. So to build experiences like that, we, as games developers, we are uniquely placed. Because that's what we do. That's what is really our expertise. It's not just building games, it's building experiences. Every single game, doesn't matter if it's mobile or big, massive, multiplayer, 3D monster games. They create experiences. Designing UI, user interfaces, designing worlds, all of it is part of creating an experience and leading a player through an experience. And that's what we need to apply to education, to learning. We need to create experiences. And these experiences teach. So we don't need to do it anymore. Okay, to understand how that works, I'll give you a tiny little bit of background in a quick run. People learn in two ways. The first one is what most of us have encountered in school. It's called passive learning. Someone tells you something, like I do today, and you, well, make sense of it and memorize it or not. So all this standard listening to instructions, teaching is passive learning because you just sit there and listen to me. It creates theoretical knowledge, and that is very useful. However, the problem with it is the usual 80-20 rule, you will only remember 20% of it. Or only 20% of you will remember anything. I don't know which way around it works. But it means very little of that knowledge is retained because we can't connect it to things in our brain. We can't connect it to experiences. Kids are better at that because they don't have so much to connect it to. They learn a bit differently. But we as adults, for us, it's incredibly difficult to learn something if we can't build it into our existing web of knowledge and understanding. It's like extending a construction. You build new things into it. You don't start again from scratch every time. So our mind wants to connect things. So that's why, particularly for adults, the much more powerful way is active learning. Active learning is, actually, it's also how babies learn. They watch, they observe, and they start to copy you. And then they practice, they experiment, Boom, milk drops, mom screams. Wow, cool, try again. Huh, milk drops, mom screams again. Cool, figured something out. So that's how kids learn. That's how we learn. We try things. That is immensely powerful because it doesn't only create knowledge, it creates knowledge and application. It means it's action, and we remember it because it has all this context. And, interestingly, 80% is, well, roughly what we retain, not just 20%. So the impact of that type of learning is much stronger. So such a learning process is experiment, observe, make the experience, enjoy the experience, hopefully, choose what works, what doesn't, experiment again. It's a pretty powerful learning cycle. And it has another really interesting element, because active learning allows us to learn in the way that suits us best. Because people are intelligent in different ways. Some of us are very mathematical and logical. We become programmers. Some of us are very visual, so we learn by absorbing visual information. So for example, you can give me a graph and I can make sense of it in minutes. You tell me a long story and I will go, what? So we all have our strength in how we absorb knowledge, what we do with it, how it sticks. If we just deliver the standard traditional school way, we only address very few of these learning mechanisms. Bit of the visual, maybe some linguistic, logical, mathematical, everything else is sort of pushed to the side. When we learn through games, all of our senses are engaged. Maybe not the smell. After we start sweating because it's so exhausting, then we even engage smell. But games allow us to learn with our entire being, to be immersed. That's the power of immersion. Immersion creates experiences, powerful experiences. So both of these approaches have their negatives or their challenges. Passive learning, as I said, is pretty ineffective, and it's very difficult to retain. But the active learning is actually quite risky. Imagine you're a manufacturer of biohazard materials, and someone comes in and says, oh, I experiment. Guess what everybody else does? They start running and go, whoa, no experimentation here. Because it's risky. That's why so little active learning is actually done. Is there an alternative? What if we could create a space in which kids and adults can learn in their own time, whenever and however they want, with a bottle of wine open if needed? A sort of playground in which you can experiment, very much like with the real stuff, as you want and as daring as you can imagine. Really throw the glass of milk 25 times, see how mom goes off. And where you can take risks and you can fail and nobody beats you up for it. And the bill to the company isn't going through the roof in seconds. So what if we could create these experiences that look very much like a computer game? Could you imagine that? Well, we could when we started our company a few years ago. And we said, it's a bit like that. Let's think of the same experimentation, as powerful as we would have it in the real world, but in a cushioned, protected environment, possibly even in VR. Learning through experience is immensely powerful because it's very authentic and it's safe. Why is it so powerful? That is because of how our brains work. Our brains are immensely fascinating, and we're working with a bunch of neuroscientists even to create games. Because what our brain does is, whenever you expose yourself to a new experience, it makes new connections throughout our entire life. How easy it makes these connections, that's what's called neuroplasticity. Maybe a further term. So this allows us to learn continuously and to unlearn even. It's a bit harder than learning. So our brain is very fascinating because it doesn't actually make a difference between an experience that we actually make and an experience that we just imagine, if we imagine it intensely. This is used by NASA, by the Navy SEALs in the US. This is used by high-performing sports athletes. And it is used because once you have been there in your mind, you can go there for real. Your brain makes the connections even if you just imagine something. Now you imagine the power that games could have if we could create these experiences and then send people back in their companies, in their roles or wherever, in their schools, with the connections made. So that's how it looks when we are currently working on. We're actually, at the moment, working on several projects for the business sector. And what we're doing is, well, it looks like a game, right? By the way, this is alpha material, yeah? So please don't beat me up for any mislighting or so. So what we have created is, we've basically created a virtual factory. It does everything a regular factory does. It has all the people in. All these people have full psychological profiles, history, stories, life dramas. And once we had created this is called the Vibe platform, Virtual Intelligent Business Environment. Once we created this, we could plant any type of scenario in there and just let it play out. As a player, you go in and you take a role, usually someone coming in from the external. We're learning everything from how we do games. You come in as the unknowing newbie. You have a problem to solve. You have something to achieve. And you work your way through this company and you learn everything faced with the problems, not given a solution to a problem you don't understand. This can be used, this technology or this approach can be used for all sorts of training and learning. Where it's really coming into play at the moment is at hard skills. So lots of gaming technology and methodology is used to train technical skills, operating machinery, etc. But it can go beyond that. It can affect behavior change. We can teach people how to appreciate, for example, health and safety regulations. It can even teach empathy, because it allows you to step into someone else's shoes. Imagine you could experience what someone experiences who is in a care home through their own eyes. VR is giving us hugely powerful boosts on that front. And this is the area which I am most fascinated by, it can help us expand the way we think. It can open our minds. Games developers, as I said earlier, are uniquely qualified to do this because we do it anyway. The only thing we have to do to venture beyond games just for fun is to create games for fun that also have an aim of getting people to experience something so they learn something. It's not as big a mind shift as you would think, although it takes a few additional bits of knowledge and expertise. So we're doing it anyway. And games for education don't need to be boring. That's why I bust gamification, because I hate the word gamification. Because a lot of things that you come across are not really exciting. There are brilliant projects. So in defense, there are brilliant projects, but a lot is from a game's point of view that you think, oh, yeah. We don't need to stay there. We can push all our ideas of quality, of power, of fun, of entertainment, of excitement that we build into our entertainment games into this sector. You can create experiences that are so real and so powerful that are also fun to experience. And we can push it beyond, like, think of the dystopian city. Now, it could be any type of game in such an environment. Okay, think of this one. I would call this an educational game. I love this game, by the way. If anyone's here who has worked on it, congratulations. Of course, you don't learn how to dispose of bombs. Yeah, let's be clear about that. What you do learn is collaboration, communication skills, clear, precise communication skills, teamwork. There are companies out there that charge the living daylight out of you to deliver these trainings in a traditional way, and they don't work. This game does it just like that, and you enjoy it. So don't think of games and education as something stuffy or boring that's just spiced up a little by being gamish. Games are educational. I used to work as a war journalist in my past. I've done all sorts of training about civil-military coordination, about civilian protection in disaster zones, etc., etc. Guess what? My lead games developer knows a lot more about this than I do. You know why? Because while I was in a war zone, he was in Chernobyl. So he was playing Daisy. Okay, bit of the additional expertise. I need to come to the end of the talking bit so that you can ask me some questions. Games design is one of 3 pillars. It's a very critical one because it creates the experience. Of course, we need to understand how people learn, and I can only just scratch the surface of that here. But if you look at your own learning experiences, one thing's for sure, you will know what doesn't work. The third one, of course, is the subject matter. Depending on what we want people to learn, we need to understand that. So I cannot make a game about management if I don't understand management. No? Or about military if I don't understand the military. Why is this so important? Why am I standing here? Why am I running around giving talks on this? I'm risking my business, right? Because by sharing all of this with you, you might actually find it so interesting that you go and you become my competition. Well, be my guest. I would love you to become my competition. We're working very collaboratively anyway, we're always looking for partners. But the real reason why I'm standing here is the world of tomorrow. Tomorrow, the world will look very different from how it looks today, and we're in a rapid change phase. We see automation, already over the last 100 years, more and more, that has joined our companies. We see AI, we see robotics, which means human jobs are replaced. We see a massive shift away from manual labor to knowledge-based work. And knowledge was once power, but now we have Google. Who needs to know anything if it's just 2 search tipsels on your keyboard away? Education hasn't caught up with this. And some of the education, I'm living in the UK, is actually moving backwards on what is needed. They're trying to make the kids memorize a lot of information, which they can Google instantly. So that will not work in the future, because the requirements are very, very different. The world has become more complex. Networks that were separate in the past are now connected. Think issues like climate change, migration. Everything is connected. And that's why we face the challenge of making these connections. We have to all think bigger. And sometimes that's incredibly scary and overwhelming. Try going shopping and you have all the things that are written on your labels and you think, do I get a plastic bag, but then I pollute the ocean? And so many things are so big picture, and for us it's very difficult to cope with them. That poses a massive challenge for education. Education doesn't need to teach us to remember things. It needs to teach us how to make sense of information, how to differentiate between fake news and real news, for example. Critical thinking, problem solving, and innovation mindset, all those are the essential skills in the future. Kids and also adults need to be smarter. We have to grow bigger minds. We can't expect to work like drones. So what we need to do is basically we need to upgrade our brains. We need humanity 2.0. And games have the power to do that. Games have the power to rewire our brains. And that's why the future of education is games-based. And you are the guys who will do it. Because you're the only ones who are qualified. Congratulations. Games developers, future's yours. Questions? Any questions? Yes? Gentlemen, can you move the microphone around?
What kind of mindset do you think the schools should focus on instead of what they're doing now?
Well, at the moment, the schools are very much focusing on drilling knowledge into the kids. Well, this is a bit of a generalization because I know, for example, the education system in the UK is very, very different from the education system here in Sweden. But in general, in a majority of countries, the idea of education is still to get kids to have a lot of knowledge. And that is to a degree important because you need a baseline. But knowledge it's only the starting point. We don't need to know a lot of things. We need to know where to find them, where to find the information, and how to make sense of the information, how to put it in context. So I think that is really one of the critical skills. The other one is critical thinking, because we have all the information, but the information usually comes unfiltered. So if you Google something, you have to work out, is this credible or is it not? And we know with just all the recent scandals, Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, etc., we know how critical that is becoming. So this is really becoming, on a social level, a critical capability that we need to bring into education. There are more aspects like that, but I think those two are really critical thinking, problem solving, but also collaboration. So it's not anymore about who's best, who's first, it's about how to collaborate and work together, because the things that we're dealing with and the direction in which we're heading as, a species require us to solve much bigger problems, and that's nothing that anyone does alone. So it's all about shifting away from this, competitive to a more collaborative mindset. And the games industry is brilliant for that. I mean, we heard that earlier. It's a lot of will to collaborate. We have a healthy competition, but we also have a mindset for collaboration. There's enough work for everybody. Okay? Other questions? Yes.
It was fascinating. Thank you for the session. It was fascinating. Well, if knowledge is one click away and trying to find the right answer by Googling it, isn't the biggest challenge here is to ask or to know how to ask the right questions?
Yes, that's very nicely put. And that's really what we need to get the kids and also ourselves retrained how to ask the right question. Mm-hmm. And then to find out which is the right answer, because there are often a lot of different answers. Other questions? Okay, come again.
I have another question. I'm a teacher, so I asked my students if they had any questions. So one of their questions is, you're a game developer, but you work also with education or trying to educate with your games. How is your idea creation? Is it different or the same as if you were making a standard, quote-unquote, game?
I think it's a very similar process. Our offices look very similar to all games companies. We have half the walls are shelved with perspex glass, everywhere are post-it notes. We're having mad brainstorming sessions. We're sitting there, we're developing characters, just that our characters usually look human and not alien or fantastic. But the process is very, very similar. We're developing games. And I find often people try to put us into the education corner, which I think we don't belong in. We are here with one foot, being actual games developers. We're developing games. You play them as games. The ones where you saw the pictures are actually built on Unreal Engine. So it's a games team. But then we have that other foot, which is sort of standing in every other industry, because this is applicable to all sorts. It's applicable to businesses, it's applicable to the education sector, and we find ourselves stood under by demands from a whole range of organizations, public and private, who want to use these tools. So yes, think of it as a games company. We're also wearing hoodies, by the way. Yes?
Sorry, yeah. My question is rather quick. Thank you for your session, it's really nice. I just want to know, what do you think in these games is the most important element if you look at sound versus graphical assets versus storytelling versus maybe AI, those kind of things? I'm talking higher level stuff than the real nitty-gritties. Even content matter, for that matter, can be included in that. What do you think is the single one, if you were to point one out and say that's the one that you should pay attention to, which one would it be?
I have a standard answer to these type of questions. It depends.
I hate that answer.
Well, what does it depend on? It depends, of course, on what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's a point. I haven't stressed that as much as I usually do, but I think it's something to really keep in mind, is that whatever we do, whatever we choose to do, whatever tools we choose to emphasize or to use, how we design our games, what platforms we use, do we build 2D or 3D, all of these technical questions need guidance. We need a reference point. And while with every game you develop, you need to define the reference point. And that is, what are we actually trying to achieve? So what are we trying to achieve, and then what are the constraints we have? So what are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to build games that are really exciting, that are great experiences. But we have a second agenda, which is we try to teach something. So these materials you see here, this is just concept art from a project we're working on, which goes a bit beyond the purely software-based games. And that one, for example, had a few very interesting requirements, because it is all about emotional engagement. This is about team interactions, about resilience and stress management. So naturally, what we need to focus on is everything that creates a hugely powerful emotional impact. So we're looking at the visuals, we're looking at sound, we're even looking at smell, because we will have them on the spot. So creating that authenticity, that immersion, that they really forget, this is a game, this is not real. So in that case, we have done other games. Maybe if you've seen the Katasha Trials visual earlier in the presentation, which is very much analytical. And we actually built that in 2012. We started in 2014, it was launched on Flash. So that's sort of outmoding now. But that time it was brilliant, because it needed to be very simple, very clean. It is what we call a first-person strategy adventure. So it's an adventure game following the traditional adventure games. But it cut everything out that was distracting. So they really had to focus on the information, on processing, on understanding, on analyzing a highly complex situation. So long answer to a short question. But I think just pick what works. It's always, I have one rule which I always follow, and that is try, experiment, observe what works, do what works, don't do what doesn't work.
Yeah.
We had a
Hey.
question up there.
Hey, mainly I don't have a question. I want to ask you a kind of advice. Because we are a small studio in Malmö, and the name of our studio is My Steamy, and we're mainly women, that we are between 23 to 35 years old, and we're developing teaching tools and AR games to teach children about gender equality, about equal treatment, and in the industry, there is not much of that, unfortunately. So my question is how you handle those things. I mean, of course, it's your work, what speaks by itself. But how you handle those things, would you feel sometimes that you don't belong, or people, they don't really understand what you do? Because many understand what EdTech actually is, and how important it is to teach children about emotions and social skills. So what advice do you have for us? Thank you.
Well, I think you're facing two challenges. One is with the content you work on, which is challenging however you try to get it across. I mean, diversity is a big topic. It's gaining momentum. So any type of social change topic is challenging, and I think you can probably talk more about that than I can, doing this type of work. Maybe you two should have a chat later. Doing this type of work in a conflict zone. So that's one thing. The other thing is, this application of gaming capabilities is fairly new. And as I said in the beginning, I'm getting pushed back into a gamification corner all the time. I continuously have to explain lengthily what I do. But that's the same with every new coming industry. The immersive tech industry is facing a similar challenge. We're still trying to explain what immersive technology is. So there's one advice: just don't give up, keep pushing. And we're pushing in the same direction. So doing talks like this, I hope, inspires you and gives you a bit of an understanding what more is out there beyond entertainment. And maybe at some point you get interested. Or maybe your companies want to look into it. Because there's one thing that's very beautiful about this. It's still wildly uncharted territory, which means there is a lot you can do without having anybody else in your way. It's real innovation. It's not reapplying things to new formats. It is real substantial innovation.
Well, I want to say thank you. This is an amazing talk. I really liked it. I just wanted to see your opinion on, like, if one would start actually pursuing this or doing something about this. Any advice on kind of like how to approach it? Because you said there was a market like this, very much like people interested. Should you just go like, I'm gonna make a game for, say, like kids creators, whatever? Or should I actually try to find, or is it an idea to go to like some school or some institutes like, hey, I would like to make this, would you like to fund it or help it? Like, any advice on that, on how's a good approach?
On one hand, dealing with this like with a normal game doesn't really work because it's not a normal game. Yeah, so you can't just go out. We've tried, I tell you, we've tried everything in terms of funding and financing these. The model we are using at the moment is a partnership model. So we're looking at end users, so that could be a school. You need to find a progressive school or university, forward thinking, daring, willing to take some risks. But finding someone who really sees the value in this and who wants to use it and team up with them. We're doing this with big name, household name companies, which I can't talk about because we are snowed under with NDAs. But I think big car manufacturers, big retailers who see the value in this and who say, okay, we'll pitch in some of the development funding and therefore we can later use it. Think of it as crowdfunding. Yeah? It's crowdfunding with companies or with organizations. That's the model that works best for us. So getting a bank to invest in this, maybe the banks in Sweden are more understanding than any bank I've talked to so far, but I've never gotten any bank funding in any of this because it's just too new. So what banks don't understand, they don't support. Well, so think out of the box and just experiment. And it's something to just get going with and then see what happens and observe and then follow the track that works best. It's a bit risky. Every new approach, every new industry is risky. Okay, I think we have a few more questions and then we need to wrap up already. Last one last question. Who's the biggest, okay, highest arm up?
Hi, we are from Finland doing also simulation-based training games, and one question we get from the customers is that how do we actually prove that these methods work? So then my question is to you, you're doing these games, how do you prove to your customers that actually these games really teach something? And yeah, so like maybe analytics and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's a very challenging question because it's all pretty new and we're all sort of pushing at the front end of it. And so there is very little traceable about it. But first of all is being this communication, sharing experiences. The first stage is anecdotal evidence, just to say, oh, this person came back to me and said this totally worked. That's your first line. What we have done in the past is we've done a project, actually the original one which we did in Flash. I used to teach at a business school, and I ran this game with students in the business schools and observed for 5 years how they responded with it. And it worked. And it turned out that I actually later could, based on how they treated the game, even distinguish who are the ones who actually have the potential to go up to CEO level and who are the ones who would rather work later on operational level in companies. Which led to us then developing on this basis an assessment game, which we just rolled out this year. So it's being very close, being in constant communication with your clients, and just building that evidence step by step. But there's no way around just pushing it out and seeing what comes back. Okay, I think I'm getting dragged off the stage now. Thanks very much for being here. It's been a pleasure. I will be around for the rest of the conference until Friday afternoon. Please approach me if you have further questions or if you want to share experiences. I'd love to hear more about what you are all doing. And yeah, well, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.